Support for this podcast comes from the Central Valley Journalism Collaborative, connecting communities with the resources, infrastructure, and networks to ensure a vibrant local free press.
From KVPR in Fresno, this is Central Valley Daily. It's Wednesday, September 10th. I'm Elizabeth Arkalian. One of the many pending lawsuits against the Trump administration comes from the City of Fresno. It aims to keep funding for nonprofits here and in several other cities.
These are local nonprofits that looked at their annual budget and were planning on, receiving federal funding.
Coming up, we'll learn about what's at stake and how Fresno is involved. But first, these headlines. The Garnet Fire east of Fresno has reached the McKinley Grove of giant sequoias. KVPR's Carrie Klein reports on how firefighters are protecting the treasured trees.
In parts of McKinley Grove, a sprinkler system has been running 24/7 for days. Jay Tracy is with the Fresno Fire Department. He says firefighters credit those sprinklers with keeping the flames' intensity relatively low.
They did not feel it was going to provide any long-term damage to the trees.
Many of the trees have also been wrapped in fire-resistant coverings, and smoke jumpers are actually climbing the towering trees to put out spot fires in their canopies.
They're kind of the pride and joy of the state, so they'll go to some extraordinary measures to ensure their survival.
McKinley Grove contains around 170 giant sequoias. The towering trees are only found in California's Sierra Nevada, and in the last decade, wildfires have killed an estimated 20% of their population. For KVPR News, I'm Carrie Klein.
As of Tuesday night, the Garnet Fire had burned more than 56,000 acres and is 14% contained. What are your top priorities for transportation spending? Road maintenance tops the list among Fresno County residents. This comes from a survey conducted by a group known as Transportation for All, according to our news partner, Fresnoland. The survey results are helping to inform supporters of Fresno County's transportation tax, known as Measure C. That measure is set to expire in 2027 and will go before voters next year for renewal. California state universities are the first to test a new program designed to help students achieve their dream careers. As KVPR's Rachel Livenall reports, the pilot will launch this fall.
The program is called Future Nav Compass. It will combine a skills assessment with artificial intelligence to help students set tailored career goals and take steps toward achieving them. The pilot will roll out with CSU campuses in Los Angeles before expanding system-wide. The application was created by ETS, a global education and testing organization. Its leaders say their goal is to offer real-time solutions for students entering the workforce. For KVPR News, I'm Rachel Livenall.
Solar panels are now covering canals at 2 locations in Stanislaus County. A program called Project Nexus installed the solar equipment on top of canals owned by Turlock Irrigation District as part of a pilot project. Researchers from UC Merced are evaluating effects like water evaporation, aquatic plant growth, and power generation. The tests are funded by the California Department of Water Resources.
Support for Central Valley Daily comes from Fresno Mazda, part of the Prieto Automotive family, leading the industry in the IIHS 2025 Top Safety Pick Awards, helping move Mazda closer to the goal of eliminating traffic fatalities. More information and the Mazda digital showroom available at myfresnomazda.com.
And now to our main story. Money from federal grants flows to communities across the country, funding everything from transportation needs to research to education. And that includes right here in the San Joaquin Valley. So why has a judge paused millions of dollars of federal funding destined for the city of Fresno and a handful of local nonprofits? Well, when President Trump took office, he signed several executive orders dictating new conditions for recipients of these funds. Specifically, recipients have to ditch their programs related to diversity, equity, and inclusion. The City of Fresno and several other agencies have sued the Trump administration, calling the move unconstitutional. And as that lawsuit plays out, millions of dollars hang in the balance. Omar Rashad with our news partner Fresnoland has been following this case and reporting on the real-life impacts for one Fresno nonprofit, where nearly half of its budget relies on this federal funding. Omar came to the KVPR studios to break this down for us, and I started by asking him why the city of Fresno took legal action.
We've had the situation for the last several months. Federal agencies have been telling local and state agencies that they need to follow the Trump administration's executive orders or risk losing federal funding altogether. And so, just going back to April, for example, Transportation Secretary Sean Duffy sent out a letter to local governments requiring that they stop DEI practices and policies and essentially fall in line with Trump's executive order on that subject. Later in June, another instance of this, a top official with the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development wrote a letter requiring grant recipients to ensure that they don't violate executive orders. And two examples of violations is promoting gender ideology, which isn't necessarily clearly defined in the letter, and then also don't promote elective abortions. And that's just, these are pretty general phrasings, general concepts. And I think that's actually another thing that's brought into question in this lawsuit, which is attorneys saying the definitions here aren't clear. Like what do these local governments do? It's pretty vague in their mind. And of course, the DOJ attorney in this lawsuit contests that as a concept, saying, no, it's pretty clear, actually. You just have to fall in line. And so, all in all, there are a number of demands and also threats to pull funding that federal grant recipients are having to figure out. Do we fall in line or do we not? And what does that mean?
So with the City of Fresno lawsuit against the Trump administration, the funds they're fighting to keep are through the Community Development Block Grant Program, or CDBG. So Fresno expected to get just over $7 million from this grant program, and then the city was going to distribute some of those funds, about $1 million, to local nonprofits. So could you share more about one of the local nonprofits that was expecting this CDBG funding?
Yeah, so, there's one organization, a nonprofit called the Central Valley Justice Coalition. They do one-on-one support, counseling guidance for human trafficking survivors. There's another nonprofit in the area, the Boys and Girls Club of Fresno County, was planned to receive, CDBG funding. Even the Chinatown Foundation was planned to receive funding as well. And these are local nonprofits that looked at their annual budget and were planning on, receiving federal funding. And, this throws a wrench in the city of Fresno's plan for the next, fiscal year. This throws a wrench in the plans for these nonprofits who are depending on this funding. And another thing worth highlighting is prominently featured in this lawsuit is not just CDBG funding, but funding from lots of other federal agencies too, including the Federal Aviation Administration, the FAA, giving out hundreds of millions of grants to local governments across the country for airport expansions. You also have the Department of Transportation giving out hundreds of millions in grants to local governments, including Fresno. So we're really talking about millions, hundreds of millions at stake. Yeah.
Do we have specifics on how the city of Fresno was planning to use this money? And can you highlight maybe their argument in their case?
Yeah. So, specifically in CDBG funding, they were hoping to use that towards infrastructure, towards facility improvements. And then in terms of the CDBG funding, they were hoping to direct to nonprofits. These are nonprofits, programs, specific activities. Like in the case of the Central Valley Justice Coalition, this is money that goes directly towards what that one-on-one day-to-day counseling looks like for human trafficking survivors.
Some of whom are children or teenagers.
Correct. Yeah. My understanding is they work with minors who, in their eyes, can depend on guidance and counseling and make it through high school or beyond. And essentially the legal argument in this case, there are a few that have been thrown out there, but one main legal argument is that it's unconstitutional for the President of the United States to set conditions on federal funding that Congress has already approved. And famously in the Constitution, Congress has the power of the purse, as elected officials like to say. Essentially, Congress decides how funding gets appropriated and what conditions apply to that. So one major legal argument here, or legal challenge, is whether the president can supersede or override and possibly set conditions on his own. And so another legal argument that the city of Fresno and the other plaintiffs have brought in court is that cutting off federal funding, once again, we're talking about hundreds of millions in federal funding, would cause irreparable harm, set back the city's growth. Plans to expand its airport are, at stake. And this is not just for Fresno. This is the case for Sacramento County, for a number of plaintiffs in this lawsuit. And the DOJ's attorney, the federal DOJ's attorney in this case, has so far argued what appears to be unsuccessfully that it wouldn't cause irreparable harm and that the government isn't actually going to strip these funds. There's still an opportunity to comply with the demands of the Trump administration. But just so far, Judge Richard Seaborg in California's Northern District Federal Court doesn't appear to have bought that concept just yet. Formal legal arguments are yet to be made in court, but Judge Seaborg granted a temporary restraining order to prevent the federal government from pulling funding from the 7 plaintiffs in this case. Yeah.
Okay, so there's currently like a pause.
Correct, yeah.
I do want to step back just for a moment because $7 million might not seem like a lot for a city of this size, but you did speak with Krista Weens, who leads the Central Valley Justice Coalition. And her organization, just to revisit this real quick, it does stand to lose over $150,000 in funding, which is 40% of her budget. So what is their plan, do you know, if this money doesn't come through?
Yeah, this is a really tense situation for anyone depending on federal funding. First off, I do want to say that the city of Fresno isn't at fault here. It's pretty clear that the federal government is the one in charge of determining, where federal funding goes and how. And essentially, the city is acting as a pass-through entity. So the funding is going from Fresno to local nonprofits in this case. And yeah, when I spoke to the Justice Coalition's executive director, she was not sure about what the future looks like. I think her main goal is to raise money in the community, hopefully recoup the funds that she was hoping for that would fund her coalition. But essentially, there's no clear answer. That this has left local cities, local nonprofits in the lurch.
Do we have any next steps in terms of legislative deadlines or any updates forthcoming we should keep an eye on?
So, yeah, there are going to be legal arguments that take place in court on September 23. But up until then, everything sort of hangs in the balance. It's unclear when a definitive decision will actually come through from a judge. But this hearing late this month will likely determine how things go moving forward. And there's also a chance that, Judge Seaborg's decision, whatever it is, gets challenged to an appeals court. If an appeals court is game for that challenge, it could go to a different court and move on. And yeah, I think what we're dealing with, and actually what the courts are dealing with, is this is money that governments, that local nonprofits need now. They're depending on it now. And so I think it's also a tricky situation in terms of how fast the courts can move. And we already have the reputation of courts moving pretty slow generally. So,
and there's a lot of lawsuits that are pressing. So
exactly. How do you prioritize and keep things moving?
Omar Rashad, government accountability reporter for our news partner, Fresnoland. As always, thank you for breaking this down for us.
Thanks so much.
And that is today's show. Today's episode was produced by Jonathan Linden and KVPR with support from the Central Valley Journalism Collaborative. I'm Elizabeth Arkalian. You can find the latest local news anytime at kvpr.org.
It's rare to find a podcast that can actually change your life. But when the show's called Life Kit, that's kind of the whole point. I'm Mariel Segarra. 3 times a week on the Life Kit podcast, we guide you through a topic we could all use help with, from personal development to healthy living to managing your dinero, with takeaways so you can start living what you learn right away. Escucha el Life Kit podcast from NPR.